When I'm teaching, what I'm trying to do is to get people to engage with the text. In a sense, I'm learning together with the class. Now, it may be true that I have typically more expertise in these texts than most or all of the people, but I'm learning with them. And the real goal of the teacher, I think, it sounds crazy, is to make the teacher disappear. In other words, the real goal is that when the students walk out after a set of classes or a year or 5 years or whatever, that they feel that this is their text, first of all, and they feel directly connected to it, and they gain some ability to learn, I would say, on their own and to work on their own. And the other part of, I think, in my teaching, certainly of biblical narrative, which I spend a good amount of time teaching, is a sense that these texts can be read in many different ways, that the great texts have all kinds of nuances, a whole variety and shades of meaning. That's not to say that every interpretation is correct. I don't believe that, actually. But it's typically true that no one interpretation is the only interpretation. And I think that to be able to see in the text multiple meanings, shadings, etc., and to see that different people come to it from different places, I think is part of what it means to study Torah. And I think that has all kinds of moral implications as well for how one treats the other person, how one understands community, what it means to build a community. I believe very strongly that one of the ways, if not the best way, to build community is around a text, a shared text, and bring people to the table, let them speak freely, openly, let them go back to the text, let them justify, and out of that we can build a community. I've seen it many times in my classes, the friendships that emerge from studying with someone else, with a study partner or with a group of people. Those are deep, deep friendships. And if you study properly, in a sense you bare your soul. You really get to know the other person well. It sounds crazy, but it's true. That through one's interpretation of text, one's approach to text, you really get to understand the other person better. So I see the study of Torah in this kind of way, certainly, as absolutely essential towards community building. And I think that the more people we can bring to the table and engage in serious high-level learning, the stronger our community is going to be. I've been teaching the Drisha for close to 30 years. One of the things I've learned is that it's very hard to gauge what kind of effect you have. Sometimes I think I'm giving a great class, and I realize, it didn't have much of an effect. And then sometimes somebody will come to me 10 years after the fact, boy, that changed my life. I can't remember the class. It was, so you never know what the other person is hearing. That's also very important. The approach that I have is, it's not so much what I'm saying. The approach that I have is, I'm trying to figure out what the text is saying. And which is not to say, by the way, that we leave it just at that, because let's assume we can figure out the text is saying X. There's also another question, which is, okay, text says X, but X may bother me from a human standpoint, and that's valid. I think that if we take the tradition seriously, it creates all kinds of problems for us. How does one respond to the tradition? After all, it may reflect values that I don't necessarily hold or that bother me. And that's part of the study of Torah. That's part of it. I would say I feel best about those teachings where I feel, and I teach great things. You teach the book of Genesis, you teach the Torah, you teach the book of Samuel. It's great. I feel good about those situations where I think we have actually uncovered a deep teaching that the text provides for us. I mean, there are deep teachings in the book of Genesis from beginning to end. There are certain things that I think are central to the book. For example, the idea of taking responsibility, which is one of the first stories. The first sin, I always say, is not just the eating of that forbidden fruit, but the real sin is when Adam said, the woman you gave me, she gave it to me. The failure to take responsibility, which is very central to the book. I don't think we can move forward individually and as a community until we are brutally honest about ourselves, about what we really believe, and about taking responsibility for the situations in which we find ourselves as individuals and as a community. The first step is to recognize where we are. And it's very hard to do that. Sometimes it's easier with a group. Sometimes if you're open to the other person's perspective, then you can hear what the other person says about you, about us, because we don't have a good take on ourselves typically. So I think that the taking of responsibility and the willingness to then deal with it, take measures, is absolutely essential to Genesis. Stories like Judah and Tamar the Joseph narrative, Jacob, story of Jacob, the transformation of Jacob. This, to me, is not just essential to Genesis. I think it's essential to Judaism, and I think it's one of the deeper teachings that we have. But of course, the devil is in the details. We can talk about responsibility all we want. The question is, how does it play out in our lives, in our communal lives? This is the question I think we should always think about. There's not a time where it's not significant. And I think now more than ever, if we are to move forward, that's the question. Where is the actual problem? What are our real values, not our professed values? Are they really up to standard? Or do we need to make some real changes in how we do business, and how we think, and where we put our energies, etc.? So those, I think, it goes back to the text in a certain way. The first step is, what does the text seem to say? And then the question is, how do I respond to it? And both individually and how different people in the community respond. Let's sit around the table, talk to each other. I think good things can come out of it.